Good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht. I am Vice President of Membership of the National Space Chapters. I'd like to welcome you to our Space Forum this evening, Automated Psychotherapy in Space, Protecting Mental Health in Orbit and Deep Space. So as always, we thank you for joining us in these series of space forums and town halls. And just as a reminder for the agenda, we'll go through a few things on virtual etiquette. We'll have some announcements. And also I'll be sharing some information about the upcoming Space Forums town halls. We'll get right into our program, and then we'll close out for the evening. As always, we ask you to try to submit some questions through the Q&A function. These can be seen directly by the panelists. It's easier to sort them out that way than putting them into the chat because there's always a lot of other information in the chat. But feel free to use the chat as well. I ask that you be respectful of the panelists and the audience when you're doing that. We did get quite a few questions that were submitted beforehand. Our speaker is going to be covering some of those in his presentation, and then we will get to the others, as many as we can, and certainly all your questions that you submit live tonight. So we're looking forward to that. As always, we encourage you to give to our cause. If you're enjoying programming like the Space Forums and Town Halls, we ask you to please donate to support NSS. And I will put this link into the chat so you have a chance to look at that over and hopefully make a donation this evening. Also, please feel free to complete that post-Space Forum survey. It only takes a few minutes. You're going to be taken right there once the Space Forum is over. And this is anonymous, so your feedback really helps us in planning future events, and we thank you for that in advance. So let's talk about what's coming up. We still have some work to do in lining up our schedule. The one coming up 2 weeks from tonight is really going to be interesting. Space is a cool place for business. This is a panel session with a group of space entrepreneurs. 4 panelists plus a moderator. And they have a wealth of, no pun intended there, they have a wealth of experience working in the space business. We are working on the schedule for October. I can tell you that we've got an astronaut lined up, hoping that we'll be able to finalize that shortly, and a few other great possibilities. Then in November, on the 10th, we're going to be doing a session with the students for the exploration and development of space, SEDS, actually live from their conference in Chicago called Space Visions. And then we're working to get the end of the year schedule and the following year, starting in 2023. So this is the first time I'm asking the audience, but I'm asking for your help. If you have ideas, topics, or suggested speakers for a future Space Forum, please let us know. We're working on that. We love your ideas. We'll do all the legwork. You don't need to worry about reaching out. If you have a person or a topic and a great idea, we want to act on that and start working and we really hope to get a schedule at least a month in advance to help you better plan for these in the future. So anything you can do to help and offer us some suggestions, we would welcome that. So what I want to do now is get into introduce our topic for tonight and our guest speaker. And I had the great pleasure of sitting next to Logan at one of the dinners at the ISDC. And we were just talking about all things space, and he was telling me about what he was doing. He's a doctoral student in clinical psychology at Oklahoma State University. And he's working on things such as suicide, also psychological therapy, and he also works to teach undergrad psychology. But he grew up with in Florida with a passion for spaceflight, and he wanted to blend his his interest in spaceflight with what he's learning as a psychologist. So he's a member of the Space Health Research Group. He's a member of the Association of Spaceflight Professionals. And additionally, he's the program manager for Space Health Division of Shuttle, which is a space travel company. And we've had some great talks on our space forums on all the different aspects of space travel, not just the science and technology, but we've covered topics such as law, we've covered medicine, we've covered nutrition, and even talked about space farms. But one thing we haven't touched on is the mental health of astronauts and space travelers. So we thought this would be a great topic. Logan is really excited about being here. So it is my pleasure now to turn over the podium to Logan Smith. Logan, it is all yours.
Thank you, Bert. Let me just get my PowerPoint going. So Bert and I met at ISDC, and that's just such a great conference. If none of you have had a chance to be at one, I encourage you to look into it. So I know that we have sort of a mixed audience right now. We have people who are definitely well-versed with all things space. We have a few people in the audience that are well-versed in all things psychology, but we also have people who are going to be green to both of these things. So my hope with this presentation is to give you a good foundational knowledge about space psychology and the idea of this particular type of therapy. And my second goal would then be to move you towards my camp, and my camp being this type of therapy is a good tool in the tool belt of mission planners for space flight missions. So we're faced with a problem when it comes to space. Our problem is, how do we help an astronaut who is suffering from a mental health disorder in space? We don't like to think about that as a thing that can happen, but bumps and bruises happen to our physical bodies on the ground and in space. We know that our brain can suffer from all sorts of problems on the ground. And as you'll see in this presentation, it can happen in space too. And another problem that we have is, should our approach change if an astronaut is engaged in a long duration deep space mission? All of our data at the moment is from low Earth orbit or close to Earth on the moon. We don't have any data on what happens if you're in a long duration deep space mission. So let me start by giving you a brief overview of space psychology. So early mission planners were under the assumption that mental toughness was all that was required to be ready for spaceflight. So that's where we get the idea of the right stuff. We think of our early astronauts who were by and large military test pilots. And the thinking was, if they could handle the stressors of test piloting a new aircraft, or if they could handle the stressors of war, then they could handle the stressors of space flight. And that was probably true for those early missions. Early missions were very quick jaunts into space, and that was sort of the focus, mental toughness. As our mission lengths increased over time, and the types of astronauts expanded, the importance of mental health became more apparent. So as we go from Mercury and Gemini and Apollo towards now Skylab and space stations, then we started thinking less about mental toughness and more about endurance, perhaps, or the ability to function up there in space. And all sorts of national space entities are now actively involved in the research of the psychology of space flight. So we've done a good job of moving from this being an afterthought to this becoming more of a forethought when it comes to planning out missions. So today, mental health interventions begin at the crew selection phase. We're very much focused on making sure that the people that we're selecting for missions are the best fit for that mission when it comes to physical health and to mental health. You could imagine that if someone has problems circulating their blood, they might not do well in low gravity or zero gravity. And the same kind of thinking applies to mental health. Maybe you don't want everybody to to go in space at this stage. So there's strict criteria for selecting crews based on physical health, mental health, and interpersonal characteristics. Astronauts today are trained in stress management and interpersonal skills and other things. The idea is we want to make sure you can manage your own stress. You can keep your own stress low. If you find yourself getting stressed out, intervene, because not only can your stress affect your mental health, but it can affect the mental health of everyone around you. And so that's a core focus at the moment. And the idea is if we can equip them now with how to fix things, we can reduce the problems later on. Or if there's going to be a problem, maybe it'd be less bad. So does this work? It's hard to say. We know that the base rate of mental health problems is lower in astronauts than in the general public. So, if you look at if you take a room of 100 people, the chance of finding a mental health problem among those 100, you might find 5 people with some type of mental health problem, maybe even as high as 10. When it comes to if you've taken 100 astronauts, probably you will not find 5 or 10 of them with depression or anxiety, perhaps. That might be because our selection is really, really good, or it might be because they're better at hiding it. That's kind of difficult to know. So why is all of this even necessary, though? Why are we spending so much effort into thinking about the physical and mental health of astronauts? And my answer for that is because spaceflight presents very real psychological hazards. We can think of the physical hazards of spaceflight. You're in an environment that wants to kill you. A lot of resources goes into just keeping you with air to breathe or water to drink or food to eat. So it's a very physically hazardous environment. And I'm offering that it's also a psychologically hazardous environment. So I'll give you an idea of sort of what I'm talking about. So there are certain stressors involved with being in space. So we could think of physiological stressors like radiation and microgravity and sleep disturbances. The human body was not meant to be in this type of environment. You don't have the atmosphere blocking out cosmic radiation quite as much. You don't have the gravity that you grew up accustomed to, and you don't have the right type of sleep environment that you're accustomed to. In fact, generally speaking, where astronauts are sleeping is quite noisy. It's nowhere near as quiet as NASA says they should be sleeping in. We can think of the psychological stressors too. You're isolated. You're not around the people that you grew up with. You're not around the people that you maybe like the most. You're fatigued and you're confined. If I'm getting stressed out from graduate school or work, whatever it is, I can always go for a walk and get some fresh air and just look at a tree. That can't quite happen at this stage in space. If you're stressed, you're confined with that stress. There's no other place to go. We can also think of some social stressors that happen. So tension with the ground crew. Every time you're in space, you have a ground crew that's making sure your mission is successful, but they have an agenda, they have needs. You might not get along with the leadership of your crew, and you might not get along with everyone on your space flight with you. And we could think of a whole bunch of other type of stressors that are involved. One thing that I like to point out is just things are not very luxurious in space at the moment. So here's a picture on the screen of an astronaut trying to take a shower. And this is really a stressful experience because not only do you have microgravity getting in the way, but it's hard to get lathered up with soap, and you have vacuums going to make sure you don't have water particles floating all over the place. Showers on Earth is a refreshing experience. You can kind of wash away the day's stresses. I have a feeling that showers in space are a stressful experience. It is not a relaxing thing to do at all. Even eating itself can be difficult in space. So whereas on the ground, eating is a way to relax and kind of recline back at the table and talk about your day. You can try that in space. There's definitely some conversations happening, but eating is much more involved. There's packets and tubes, and you have to worry about crumbs, and it's not a relaxing thing. The things that we count on to relax us aren't relaxing when you're in space, and that can be a stressful experience. There's also the psychological hazard of space, that is psychological disorders. So there's no known occurrences of an actual diagnosable, categorized psychological disorder in space. So we don't have a report of someone developing PTSD in space or schizophrenia in space or things like that. Not to say that it's impossible to happen or that it hasn't happened. I don't think we've had anything crazy intense in space, but it's just that we don't have any reports of it. But what we do have reports of is psychological symptoms that have been happening in space. There's anxiety symptoms and depressive symptoms and psychiatric symptoms at times, and irrational behavior and fatigue. So some examples that I just sort of pulled for you all. In 1973, there was a Skylab 4 mission, and tension between the ground crew and the astronauts had boiled over to the point where the astronauts on the station cut off all communications with the ground crew and stopped working for an entire day. It sort of like went on strike for an entire day. Luckily, that was just for a single day, but you can imagine how if that was a deep space mission, that could have been disastrous. In 1982, we know that there was a cosmonaut who was feeling depressed and isolated. He was missing his family quite a bit. In 1985, a Soyuz mission ended 60% earlier than expected. And the Russians were sort of tight-lipped about why that is, but it seems like it was due to some type of mood and performance problems. So it cut a mission 60% short. And we know that over the course of 89 American space shuttle missions, there's been 34 behavioral issues reported among 208 crew. So there's definitely been instances of behavioral issues in space, psychological issues in space. One of the most fascinating ones is, I forget the exact mission that it happened on, but a cosmonaut became so euphoric over being in space and just the grandeur of it all, that he started an unscheduled spacewalk to go out and look at it. And he forgot to tether himself to the spacecraft. And the only reason why he didn't float away and die is because one of his crewmates realized what was happening and grabbed his foot and pulled him back in time. So space can do some funny things to your mind. We know that psychological disorders are anticipated for a long duration deep space mission. It's not a possibility. It's not just a maybe. It's anticipated. I would be shocked if someone engaged in a long duration deep space mission didn't have some type of psychological symptom. And there's a probability that in a decent sized crew, someone will have a disorder. Most of our research at the moment, when it comes to this, we use what's called space analog research. So we don't have any deep space missions at the moment, but we can look at what it's like to be stationed in Antarctica or on submarine crew. And we use that as sort of an analog for understanding what happens when you're isolated or confined for months on end in a hostile environment. And sure enough, no matter how much we screen these people and try to train them and prepare them, there's still issues that pop up. Our brain is an organ, just like any other organ in our body. Sometimes things are going to go wrong. So circling back to the problem is, how do we help an astronaut who is suffering from a mental health problem in space? And currently we offer medications and psychotherapy and hypnosis even. We teach them how to relax their muscles, and we offer various supportive measures for their stress, like exercise and eating more, calling their family, surprise gifts from Earth, things like that. That's a good way to help astronauts who are having mental health problems. We can do more though. this is still a growing field. We're still learning. It's only in the past 30 or 40 years that NASA's really been devoting a lot of time towards this. So we can do much more. And the second question we should be asking is, should our approach change if an astronaut is engaged in a long duration deep space mission? And I say absolutely. And that's where I propose the idea of automated psychotherapy. This is not the end all be all of therapy. This is a tool that you should have in your tool belt as a mission planner. Think about someone building a house. If they don't have a hammer in their tool belt, they're going to have a hard time doing hammer-like things. So you want to make sure you have the right tools for the job. And I would say that automated therapy is a very important tool to have. So here's what this is. This is a method of delivering psychological therapy to various groups of people. And it's especially for people who are underserved or otherwise unreachable from traditional therapy. So think about people who maybe don't have a therapist in their community or access to a therapist at the moment, whether it's because they're rural or they're in an extreme environment or whatever it is. They need therapy, but they can't get access to it. It's been shown to be highly effective in treating various psychological disorders with lasting and reliable results. And this is not in space. This is on the ground. And that last phrase, lasting and reliable results, something that is really important to keep in mind. Sitting around a campfire might make me feel better about my day for a day, but that's not a lasting or reliable way to treat a psychological disorder. Therapy is whatever can bring lasting and reliable results. And automated psychotherapy has been found to be able to do that. So the way that it works is there's going to be a series of computer-delivered modules that are going to explain psychological terms to you, recommend tasks and training to you, assess symptoms for you and your progress, and it's going to use standardized, empirically supported measures. Basically, it's going to function exactly what a good trained therapist should be doing. When I have clients coming to me for therapy, in addition to listening to them and developing rapport with them, I'm also thinking of solutions or thinking of symptoms or what they're showing me and what I should ask next and what they should be doing that they may not be doing or what they should think of that they maybe haven't thought of yet. And this is how therapy works, and this is how automated therapy could work too. This can mitigate the issues or kind of lessen the issues that confound traditional therapy or teletherapy. So before I kind of explain what that means, I think it's important to talk about therapy in general. So the question that oftentimes gets asked is, does psychotherapy even work? Like, is psychotherapy even effective for mental health? And that's a fair question. The way that the media portrays therapy is you think of reclining on a couch and some man with a long gray beard is asking you about your dreams, your childhood, and he's writing everything down. And I can understand why, if that was what you thought therapy was, that it might not be that helpful. And likewise, if you thought therapy is just talking about your feelings and nothing more, then I can also understand why someone would be skeptical of how good it is. But real scientifically based, empirically supported therapy is much more than that. There's data to back it up. There's plenty of research to back it up. And it's a system of determining what's going on, what's the root cause of what is going on, and how we can either solve the problem or learn to cope with the problem a little bit better. Not everything can be solved, but we could figure out how to cope with the problem a little bit better. So this is from someone else's research. This is a graph that I found. I can always supply the link to this later. But this is really, really great. They did a meta-analysis of a lot of different studies, and they were tracking outcomes of therapy. And the outcome was whatever the person agreed was their outcome. Do they think that they were better off or not? And it's hard to see with this screen, but basically this yellow curve is the average therapy client, and the blue curve is the average person who was not treated. And what they found is that on average, those who went through therapy were more likely to have, in their mind, a good outcome. So that's up to the person to decide what a good outcome is. But that's just sort of an idea of the way that it works. So you could think of therapy as a way of your therapist helping you figure out how to solve your problem or cope with it better. So it's been happening for decades and decades and decades. It's becoming more and more popular and accessible. And automated type therapy is relatively new, but it first started getting talked about 20 years ago. So it's not entirely new. And there's a growing body of research to support it in a growing number of ways that it has been found to be helpful. So let's talk about some advantages of it. So it's widely discussed as a potentially popular method of delivering therapy on Earth. Providing therapy in space is exceptionally hard. And there's a couple of reasons. One is you could encounter delayed communications. So if you're orbiting Earth and your therapist is on Earth, the kind of lag between you talking and them hearing and them responding and you hearing is determined by the speed of light and some processing of computers, but mostly just the speed of light. The lag is going to be under a second, usually. If you were as far away as the moon, it would be a little bit longer. But if you get out to where Mars is, now we're talking a light lag of 16 minutes, perhaps, or even longer at times. And that's going to be difficult. You can't have a conversation with someone if you have to say something, wait 8 minutes for your message to reach them, and then 8 minutes for their message to get back to you. If you get further deeper into space, now you're talking hours or even days. There's also a hazard of what's called a dual relationship. A dual relationship in therapy is whenever you and your therapist have some type of relationship outside of therapy. And the APA has a lot of guidelines around how to have any type of relationship, friendship, romantically, anything like that, with a therapy client, because not only can it make things awkward, but it presents a way for a therapist to accidentally or purposely harm someone. If you know things that maybe you shouldn't know, that could really change the dynamic of a relationship. So if you're in space and you have a crew of 8 people, how exactly are you going to avoid a dual relationship if one of those 8 is your psychological therapist, right? It's going to be very awkward. Maybe if your crew was as large as 1,000 people, you could get away with it. Maybe a smaller number would work, but 8, 20, 50, I don't see a way to have a therapist on board that mission without getting into dual relationships. And there's also just a lack of privacy on board a lot of spacecraft and space stations. So it's hard to have like a conversation between 2 people without everyone else listening in accidentally. Although I can imagine ways of, solving that. So when we automate our therapy, it eliminates the communication delay and the dual relationships, because you're not talking with someone back on Earth. You're talking with your computer. You're talking with whatever this software is. And some of it's going to be you talking and it's analyzing your speech. Other parts of therapy might involve you filling out questionnaires. It's going to be monitoring where your eyes are looking, your heart rate, things like that, and making recommendations. That's instantaneous. That doesn't require someone on Earth to get your message and think about it. That's fast. So for example, there's a really popular method of automated type, which is called Internet Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And it's called Internet, but it doesn't take place over the Internet. It's called Internet because it came out around the time that a lot of things that involved technology just had the I in front of it, iPhone, iPad, CBT. So, but it's effective for treating a lot of different things: depression, anxiety, phobias, panic disorders, eating disorders, cannabis use disorders, all sorts of things. So, CBT has been found to be effective. People are using it right now. So right this minute, there is someone in the world who is using this type of therapy to feel or get better. So this type of therapy offers a lot of advantages, especially for a space flight environment. So we can imagine some uses then. One use might be a regular mental health check-in to catch an early warning sign of some type of mental health problem. We're already doing physical health check-ins. You do that with your doctor annually, perhaps, or you should. And astronauts are doing it often too. NASA or mission planners are monitoring their heart rate, and they're monitoring their exercise levels and their diet and all of these things to catch early warning signs. And we could do the same thing with psychology. We could be monitoring, like, is anxiety creeping in? Is depression creeping in? Are they starting to feel stuck? Are they starting to feel jaded with the mission? Things like that. We could make sure we're training and retraining on stress management and interpersonal conflict management. You don't want an interpersonal conflict to spiral out when you're in space and you're confined with those people. We could also do what's called a brief intervention. This is see a problem, fix a problem. So really briefly responding to something. I do this with my therapy clients often. If I have a therapy client that is getting more stressed or more depressed, oftentimes when you're depressed, your brain's not thinking the way it normally does, your memory's not working right, and you don't remember the things that make you feel better. Or you might remember it, but your depressed brain is telling you that, no, that's pointless, right? But a third party can say, like, no, I think that you should take a walk. I think that you should go work out. I think that you should go have like an actual meal. I think you should do this, that, or this. And it's helpful to have that third party, that brief intervention that might be what it takes to take your depression from an 8 to a 5. Just kind of down a couple of notches. This type of therapy also allows for highly individualized treatments. You experience this with your smartphone all of the time. When you're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is, and if you hover over an ad for a little bit too long, or you click like on something, the algorithm starts feeding you more and more of that type of thing. And it individualizes your social media experience. That's sort of like a very marketing way of looking at it, but that type of thing can happen with therapy too. As just like as I get to know my therapy clients, I highly individualize their treatment. A computer could do the same thing with your therapy. In fact, any good therapist offers highly individualized ways of treating their clients. One particular good thing about this type of therapy is, imagine that you're a commander of a mission. How do you tell someone on your mission that you're having mental health problems? Because that's a recipe for mutiny. If you think that your commander isn't keeping his mental health in check, if you think he might be feeling depressed or anxious or afraid, it could make you start to doubt whether he should be in charge or not. And as a result, those who are in leadership positions might be less likely to seek help because they don't want to sound the alarm bells. But if your therapist is not a crew member, but a non-judging, always warm and welcoming computer, which sounds weird to say about a computer, but that might make you much more likely to get help early before you desperately need it. And when we combine this with passive monitoring of your physiological data, it can really offer us a nice suite of information about you and how to help you better. So there's some unknowns of this therapy, of course. We haven't figured out everything yet. One of the biggest unknowns is what predicts the likelihood of a person adhering to a psychotherapy treatment that's automated. People don't always adhere to traditional therapy on Earth. People stop showing up, they quit therapy, or they're skipping appointments, or they don't do the homework that's prescribed to them, or this happens with just medicine in general. Some people stop taking their medicine, or they miss a dose, or they double dose, or whatever it is. So we always have problems with treatment adherence, but we don't quite know yet if those same problems will be what we see with automated type, or if there's going to be different predictions of not adhering to treatment. So we need to figure out that still. We would want to know how prediction of adherence to treatment overlaps with common astronaut personality profiles. When we think of the personality of an astronaut, you want someone who's resilient to stress, who is interpersonal, who is a goal setter and self-motivator. But does this overlap well with adhering to automated psychotherapy or not? We don't know, but that is worth looking into. We also don't know how suitable this therapy is for a severe problem. So someone is having a mental health breakdown. Would this type of therapy work? Maybe not. So right now, if someone on the space station has a mental health breakdown of some sort, the plan in place that NASA has is to medicate to stabilize them, to restrain them if necessary, although that is to be avoided. And in an absolute emergency, you would do a return to Earth as quickly as possible. Same basic thing applies to if you're in Antarctica or deployed at the military, whatever it is. But that's not quite going to be possible to do an emergency return to Earth if you're on Mars or even further. So we're going to have to figure out how best to deal with those. And we need to know if automated psychotherapy can play a role in that or not. We might need to know if we can modify how this treatment works for the unwilling participant. We don't like thinking about treating someone who's not willing to be treated. That feels kind of weird and uncomfortable. But when you're in a deep space mission and you're one of a crew of 8, maybe you don't have the luxury of refusing to participate in therapy. Maybe you don't get to say no. That's a question for people who are really big into ethics and mission planners. I don't know the answer to that. But if they decide that therapy is non-optional for astronauts, then we need to know if automated type therapy can even work. And one thing that I think is interesting is if this type of therapy can guide our selection criteria for crews. So right now we select astronaut crews based on who's less likely to have a problem, right? So who does not have a physical health problem, who does not have a predisposition to heart issues or asthma or whatever it is. And the same thing applies with mental health. Well, you don't want someone with a history of severe depression or anxiety. You don't want someone who has a family history of X, Y, or Z. But what if automated type, if our automated way of doing therapy becomes so good that maybe instead of getting people who are resilient to everything, maybe you want people who just respond very well to treatment. Someone who, if they have a problem, this therapy helps them like that very easily, very reliably. So maybe rather than selecting people who just never break, selecting those who, if they do break, they are easily fixed. And that's an interesting way of thinking about how to expand our astronaut corps to get more and more people into space. So there's current research that is happening now. If anyone is interested in this, this is just sort of like a brief overview of just 3 of those. Drift, that bottom one, is really an interesting one. They're doing research right now on automated therapy, not only for astronauts, but for people in Antarctica, for people who are climbing Mount Everest, for people in any type of extreme environment who might need therapy. Drift is doing research into that. So that's really fascinating stuff there. But I always like to pause and kind of acknowledge where we are right now. So we know that the world is dealing with pandemics and a lot of economic issues and conflicts and war. And when we start thinking about space, to some it can seem insensitive or inappropriate. The idea that we have so many problems here on Earth, and we're thinking about things outside of Earth can just feel like our heads in the clouds or in the stars. But what a lot of space enthusiasts know is that space flight improves lives on Earth. The technological breakthroughs that come as a result of doing research for space makes life better on Earth. Everything from our Velcro on our clothes to GPS for driving our cars. And therapy research, especially automated, will improve life on Earth too. There are people who need therapy that maybe can't get traditional type therapy, that need automated type therapy. And if we can research that for space, we can apply what we learned to Earth too. So example, someone who's in a rural community, they don't have a therapist around, that would be a good way of getting therapy. Now, oftentimes you could get maybe teletherapy. So like a counselor or a therapist who's in a different state could maybe be able to like speak with you. But imagine a woman in a domestic violence home where her partner doesn't want her getting help. And the only time that she can talk to a therapist is between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. When she goes out to her car and has the privacy of being in her car in her driveway. Well, there's no therapist in your area open at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., but your automated therapist would be available. And we can think of other extreme examples like this that unfortunately are very real realities for a lot of people. They may not be able to talk to a therapist when a therapist will be available. Maybe they can't afford a therapist. Right now, a lot of therapists just have a wait list for weeks and months. It's so long to see a therapist now. But an automated one wouldn't have a wait list. It wouldn't have a bedtime. It wouldn't have holidays or time restrictions. So it could make it quite accessible for people. So we try to keep that in mind. As much as it's fun to talk about future habitats in space and exploring the moons of Saturn, it's important to remember there's problems on Earth too, but solving problems in space can solve problems on Earth. So in the future, we want to test this type of therapy in low Earth orbit that has not been done yet. We want to test this type of therapy in a Mars analog environment, so somewhere on Earth simulating what it's like being at Mars. We want to disseminate this research finding to other people who could benefit from this. We want to make sure that if we research these things and solve problems, it doesn't stay in a locked box of space researchers. We want to get this out to people who need it. And we want to find the limits of this type of therapy and develop plans accordingly. And finally, we want to determine if and how our crew criteria should change in response to this tool that should be in our tool belt. So if you wanted to take a screenshot or a picture of a slide, this is it. This sort of just goes through all of the bullet points of what we talked about. So if you ever wanted to refer back to something like, what was it that he was saying? This is sort of that key slide. And then this is a manuscript that is also pending at a journal. If you are interested in reading a preprint of that manuscript, you can scan the QR code on the screen. It'll pull up that file. You can preview it, download it, whatever. It's free. But thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Logan. That was really fascinating. I think a good place to, I know we've got a number of questions that have come in, but a good place to start might be something you mentioned at the beginning when you talked about, take a room of 100 average everyday people, and you might find that somewhere between 5 and 10 individuals that might have some sort of mental issue. Take 100 astronauts, and because of who they are, how they're selected, you're probably not going to see the same thing. And when you look at the professional astronauts NASA has, the last class, 18,000 people applied and 12 were accepted. So you have to think they're kind of extraordinary. But as space opens up to more everyday people, would you say this is, as you say, this will become more of a challenge for space flight?
Absolutely. So just on regular life on Earth, 80% of adults will at some point in their lifetime have what would have been categorized as a mental health disorder if it was caught. Doesn't mean it's permanent, but it means that it's there. 80% of adults at some point in their lifetime. I don't know what it would be for people in space, but as we get more and more people up there in space, it's going to happen. And what I've always thought is that the deep space environment is so foreign to our brains that I think that we're going to have a sharp increase in mental health problems in space. When Earth stops being something that you can like really see and it becomes like a little blue dot in the sky, I don't know what that is going to do to the human psyche, but I think it's worth having plans for it.
You mentioned about studies that have been done like Antarctica and submarines. I know I'm a volunteer at the Intrepid, and I worked in the Growler, the submarine. And I know that was painted in a certain color. I was told it was soothing to the crew. They're underwater for 3 months and never seeing sunlight and fresh air. What types of things were learned by some of the studies of the, as you say, the analog approach?
So there's a lot of research happening right now about that. And from previous experiences, we're learning all about the types of colors of the surroundings. We're learning about what type of lighting should be, the sound that like we should have around us, smells. Here's a fun fact. From what astronauts and cosmonauts tell us, living in space stinks. It's very smelly environment. People are sweaty. The computers make this hot ozone smell, and that can grind on your nerves over time. So we're learning that every aspect of the environment needs altering. Right now, if you go up in space, it is not a luxurious experience. If you ever see pictures of the inside of the ISS, it's just the walls are covered in wires. It's not very pleasant to be in. We're going to want to fix that as we get into more of a deep space idea. One thing that is an interesting idea is Orbital Assembly, as a private spaceflight company. They are trying to build spin gravity habitats in space. And I have to say, I've spoken to a lot of private spaceflight companies, and Orbital Assembly seems to be taking this the most seriously when it comes to how the interior design of their habitats can influence the human mind. And I think it's because they are planning for people to live in their habitats for a long amount of time, whereas maybe some other private spaceflight companies aren't quite there yet.
Right. I want to get a couple questions that came in from our members who registered. And you've kind of touched on it in a way, but it said, should at least one crew member on every long duration mission be trained in psychotherapy, like the astronauts are trained in emergency medical procedures, or should there actually be a psychologist on board? And you kind of touched on it, the challenges of the privacy issues. Is a commander going to be able to tell this to somebody? So
yeah,
it doesn't sound like that's really the solution, right?
No, it's not the solution, at least not until we have very large voyages happening. Or maybe we have a more permanent station where there could be hundreds of people there. But some training would be helpful. Just like, we train astronauts to respond to medical problems. Some basic psychological response training would be helpful for a few reasons. One, knowing how to fix other people's problems can help you fix your own. Two, you definitely want to know how to not make things worse. So oftentimes when you give first aid training, it's not only just to help someone save a life, but it's helped people know how not to make someone more injured. So this like same applies to space. And three, if we have someone who's having a serious breakdown and they're not going to cooperate with traditional therapy, you have to have something in mind of how to deal with that. So maybe some psychological first aid training would be helpful.
Right. No, that sounds like a good AI-driven visual avatars and virtual reality. Maybe, it sounds like that's even taking automated psychotherapy even further, that you'd be able to interact with this. And is that something that we're looking at as well?
So virtual reality, I can almost give a guarantee that any deep space mission will have some component of virtual reality there. There's been a lot of research into that. It is helpful. We use virtual reality now in therapy. We use it oftentimes for PTSD. Several years ago, I was helping out with a research project that was using virtual reality for soldiers who were returning from the Middle East with PTSD, allowing them to go back to the environment and relive the experience to try to process it better. So virtual reality can be a therapeutic thing. Now, as far as like virtual avatars go, we think of like an Cortana and the Halo games or things like that, where you see like a virtual computer model. I don't know. I think that there's arguments for and against it. So people for it would say, like, this is a way to take this cold faceless computer, give it a face, allow you to establish some type of relationship with it. Against it, people could say, you might get some weird attachments to a virtual computer that has an avatar that feels like it's closer than anyone else to you. So we're going to have to do some trial and error, probably.
Right. Now, I know you talked about being away on a long duration mission. You're away from your family, people but someone asked about whether plants or animals might serve as a way to help, as you say, give people some relief, stress relief.
Plants definitely can. If you've ever heard what the astronauts say about growing the tiny amounts of plants that they have on the ISS, it is a therapeutic experience. When you see that leaf sprout out of the soil, it feels great. We know from on Earth that plants can really make things a lot better. So yes, that's going to be helpful for scrubbing oxygen, getting food, and making us feel better. When it comes to animals, that's difficult. I know there are people who are researching how to have animals in space. Without artificial gravity, you're going to have some issues. Animals get stressed out, and more importantly, their fur is going to go everywhere and gunk up computers and fans and stuff. If you have just the slightest bit of gravity to where the fur goes down, now maybe it's more plausible. I don't think it's going to be a near future thing, but I don't see why this century we wouldn't have people trying out pets in space.
Right. Let me go to some of the questions that our audience that have asked. Carl asks, what psychological tests are giving to potential astronauts?
That's a great question, Carl. We don't know. NASA is very tight-lipped about that. We know that they give some type of questions, but it's like an industry secret. We also know that that NASA does a lot of interviews with their astronauts they use for screening out people, but I don't know. In traditional therapy, we use things like the SCID or the Mini that we use to do kind of broad screen of things, but I'm sure that whatever NASA is using is much broader than that. I hope that they share that information a little bit more as private companies start trying to plan missions.
Bianca asks, most automated therapy programs I've seen are based on cognitive behavioral therapy. What other therapy approaches, such as Rogerian, psychodynamic, et cetera, do you believe should be applied, if any?
So CBT is like a great one for that. I could imagine ACT, acceptance and commitment, being a good one. I could also imagine ERP, exposure response prevention, being really good for automated therapy. If I had to think of another one, I could also see problem solving therapy being good for that platform. But yeah, I would love to see all types of therapy try to adapt to this tool, and maybe some can't, but maybe some can.
Right. Aiden asks, I think you have kind of touched on this briefly before, but how should a major mental episode be handled in deep space?
Hey, Aiden, great question. So when it comes to major mental health episodes in deep space, the first response is going to be to stabilize the person. That's how it works with major mental health episodes on Earth too. You want to stabilize them. You want to keep them safe. You want to keep people around them safe. Oftentimes that comes through some type of medication. Beyond that, if that isn't working, restraints are on the procedures for the space station. So that might have to be something that's used. You want to avoid that if possible, because restraints oftentimes can make people feel worse too. That's sort of like a last resort thing. And then if it's near enough to Earth and whatever the problem is not getting better, they do have on the plans to do an emergency return to Earth. That might not be possible for a deep space mission.
Very good. Let's see, another question from Carl. Would inclusion of a humanoid robot to provide psychotherapy be useful? That's
I could see that. Right now, humanoid robots are less than convincing. And when they try to make them more convincing, we get into the uncanny valley thing where it just is kind of weirding us out. So maybe it's best to actually not have it look too human-like. But why not? You know, let's try it out. I think a lot of these things we're gonna have to try out on Earth first and do some fine tuning before trying it out in space. But I think that as robotics get better, that'll be a natural application.
right. Automated psychotherapy be broadly tested on Earth's population to determine overall efficacy before being tested specifically on astronauts or astronaut candidates?
Yeah, so we would definitely want to be testing this on the Earth. They're doing it now. We would want to be testing on Earth for two reasons. One is exactly kind of what you were implying there. There's a lot of risk involved with doing it in space. Want to make sure we're hammering out the kinks first on Earth. But two, there's more of a need for on Earth. There's more people who need this technology, who need this type of therapy. So if you're someone who is kind of driven by market principles, there is a market that is ready to be filled on Earth for this type of therapy.
Some really great questions. This one is very interesting from Bianca. And we know when astronauts are in space, their families are still back on Earth, going through everything you go through on Earth. How do you believe astronauts should deal with the loss of a loved one on Earth during a long duration voyage?
So Bianca, that's a fascinating question. So back before the International Space Station became the International Space Station, it was originally designed to be an American project called Space Station Freedom. And I've seen the forms that NASA was using at the time. Every astronaut who was going to go up to Space Station Freedom was going to fill out a form that would identify who their close personal ties are. And on that form, they would say what type of news they want to be informed about and what type of news they do not want to be informed about. If you were in space on the space station and your brother got into a car accident and died, would you want to know? Some people would want to know. Others might not want to know. And because you can imagine feeling helpless, like you can't do anything. You're up there. You can't do anything. Now that would be a little bit harder. It's a little bit harder to keep a secret. Now, when you have access to the internet, that might change in deep space. The way NASA has dealt with this in the past, as I kind of outlined it there, is they do it on a case-by-case basis. They let the astronaut decide based on what they know about themselves. Would they rather know or would they rather not know? And I think that's like a good way of approaching it.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. So let me go to chat, see what questions are there. And I know a couple of people have raised their hands, so we will try to give them an opportunity. Let's see. One of our previous speakers, Marian Dyson, she's asking, are you familiar with the Feeling Good Handbook? This is a way to work through issues with another trusted person, and this could be automated. Maybe it already has been.
You know, I've heard of that. I haven't read it, haven't looked at it, but I've heard of people in my program recommend that to other clients of theirs. That sounds like a natural way to sort of apply that to this type of therapy. And you're right, maybe it already has been, but I don't know too much about it enough to speak intelligently on it.
Sounds like something we can look into a little further.
Definitely.
Another question. Well, there are kind of two questions. I think you've touched on this before about standard procedures for addressing problems in space. But someone along with that, they asked about what types of medications are typically carried on a spacecraft to treat mental issues.
So you would be surprised by how much is up there. So there was an excellent paper that came out by Dr. Friedman, forget his first name, came out 5 years ago, called a Psychiatric Formulary for Space. And he had done all of the homework, and you could go look up the article. It shows you every drug that is on board the International Space Station right now. And it's jaw-dropping. There's a lot of medicine up there to deal with almost any problem. And in this paper, he outlines what he thinks also should be added on for a deep space mission. Now, the issue comes, there is mixed findings on what zero gravity and cosmic radiation does to the expiration date, you might say, on these medicines. And some research, it seems like they might degrade faster, and other research, it looks like it really doesn't make a difference. So we still need to kind of research that more. But there is a lot of medicine available, and you want to have a lot available to deal with all sorts of different things, because CVS is going to be a little bit far from where you are.
Right. Carl gets a lot of questions from Carl. He's asking, is there some form of energy therapy being considered?
Energy therapy? I don't think I've heard of that.
Maybe we can ask Carl if he can. Let me see if he's got his hand up here. Let me just go to let me see who has their hands up. Oh yeah. He can expand on that question. And so Carl, you're on mute right now. You should be able to talk. Try to unmute. There you go. There you go, Carl.
Okay. That energy therapy, that would be similar to something like the chakras or any kind of an approach that was taken from, say, for example, the Hindu religions and the religions of the East. And now that we're practicing it in modern day therapy as well, to a certain extent, by touching the body in certain ways, tapping the thorax area and things of that nature, and thinking about the energy as it flows through the body. Is that sound familiar?
So yes, I've heard of that. I'm not entirely sure if there's any research going on into that, but I do know that there is someone who is planning to do research onto that in the next couple of years on a private space flight mission. I don't know when that's going up. I don't know about if there's much research beyond if that's effective or not. but I have heard of that. And I know that someone is planning to research it in space in the next couple of years. So just kind of hang on for that, and we'll see if it shakes out.
May I ask a similar a question very quickly?
Sure.
Go ahead, Carl, one more.
Is prayer therapy being considered?
Prayer therapy. So spirituality and prayer as a therapy mechanism, I don't know if that is being considered for space. We do know that for a lot of people, it can be effective on Earth. And interestingly enough, the vast majority of astronauts who go into space come back reporting some type of spiritual change. So we know that space travel tends to have spiritual effects on the person. So I could imagine that spirituality would play a role in someone's resiliency or response to stress or distress or whatever it is. I don't know if anyone's researching that for space, although I'm sure somebody is thinking of it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, you, Carl.
Let me get to our other guests who raised their hands, so we can, and then we can get back to the questions that have come in from chat. So we've got Aiden. Aiden, you can go ahead. You're on mute though. There you go.
Can you hear me?
We hear you now.
Yep. I was going to ask, would children and adults be affected differently in deep space? And would children born in space be more susceptible to mental illness? Thank you.
Fascinating question. So there's no data on this yet, but there's a lot of different theories. If we don't have gravity, then perhaps the way that your brain forms would be different. Being born into a zero gravity environment or a microgravity environment versus being born on Earth or the Moon or Mars. We just don't know yet. Another thing to think of though is that, perhaps being born in space means you adapt to it better. You don't know anything else, so you don't miss anything else. It's really something to think about. I right now, there's no research allowed on gestation of humans in space or sex or anything like that. So we don't know, but we're gonna have to cross that bridge eventually.
Very good. Thanks, Aiden. Okay, and I'm going to let Ryan ask a question. There we go. So Ryan, you're also muted, so make sure you unmute.
Sorry about
You there,
that.
Ryan? There
Hi
you go.
there.
Perfect. We hear you.
Hi there. I'm actually a family doc from Canada, and I was just wondering whether or not this is something that is available on the large scale, because that would be really beneficial here on Earth as well too. And I guess it would probably feed back, if you have it well developed on Earth, then you could just kind of port that that program onto a spacecraft, and it'd be that much better off.
That is an excellent question. So I get the sense that it is available. It's not advertised much at all. The most common one that I mentioned was called Internet Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. So if you look up that, you might find some ways that are gonna offer it. I've noticed that they've tried to do this. There was a company a couple of years ago really got its footing during lockdown, when the lockdown for COVID first started, called Replica AI. And it was supposed to be sort of like a chat companion therapy bot that was supposed to help with loneliness and isolation. And within the year, they pivoted to make it more of like a romantic chat bot instead of a therapeutic one, because it seemed like that was where the market was more. So I don't know of anyone that stayed purely just for therapeutic reasons, but if you can find a platform that offers internet cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the one that I know has been researched the most. That could be a possibility.
All right,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think Harry. Larry, you there?
Yeah, I didn't hear you say my name.
Oh, well, just it. You're good to go.
Okay, I noticed there's a lot of different environmental stressors in there. And it all depends on where you're at. Like it's when I was in the military, when you're on base, like if you're in the Pentagon, it's a whole different thing than when you're in the field. And it's what you're used. It is what you are used to. One of the millionaires that went up to the space station came back and asked him, well, on a tourist basis, what is it like living up there? And he came up and he said, it's more like a roast motel than it is the Hilton.
Yeah.
And he said it takes getting used to. And the thing is, and getting an ear to it. There's one thing about your thing tonight. You're talking about the people like this, but if you have a glitch in your computer program like that, you're going to start asking your questions like, "Open the pod bay doors, Hal."
Yeah, it's always a possibility that a computer program will mess up, just like it's a possibility that a therapist will mess up. Right now, there's a lot of errors with these automated chat bots or AI. My professor and I were talking this afternoon. He was telling me about this example of they were trying to train an AI to recognize COVID damage and scans of people's lungs. And the AI was getting really, really good at looking at these pictures of X-rays. And then it started to veer off into nowhere, and it was not getting it right at all. And it turns out it was getting distracted by the hospital's logo on the X-ray and not the actual scan of the lungs. So things like that happen all the time. And it definitely is going to take a human eye at first to make sure we get this program trained right. I don't think we'll, in the foreseeable future, have an automated therapy where at least some human back on Earth isn't keeping tabs on it. But maybe after this really gets its feet under it, we could have completely no humans involved.
Very good. Thanks, Larry. There are a couple more questions that came in through Q&A, and a few more people have raised their hands. And I'd like to get a couple more that were submitted. So if you're okay to go a little bit longer, Logan?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so great. So another question from Bianca. Do you believe that the crew should be composed of people who have never anxiety, depression, etc.?
So that is a great question. I can see the argument on both sides. I think that right now, when it comes to the missions that we're thinking of, people who have no history of this might be more what like mission planners are thinking of. But I could see that for a long duration mission, knowing that someone is good at coping with something might be more attractive as an astronaut candidate and someone who's never experienced it before. That's sort of what I was getting at with the idea that maybe if we find out that this is a really good treatment plan, maybe we can find out that response to treatment is better than never having experienced it at all. Maybe we could be more inclusive by thinking of someone who we know can get better versus someone who's a mystery. Maybe like a known quantity would be better than someone who we're just hoping that they continue their track record of never getting depressed. So that is an excellent question.
Very good. I'm going to go to one that was submitted beforehand, and it's kind of interesting. Would the inclusion of married couples on a mission be more likely to improve or degrade the psychological well-being of a deep space crew?
So that is a great question. So I'm trying to think of the names at the moment. There was a couple of astronauts that met during astronaut training, and they began dating during astronaut training, and they got married in secret before their mission. They went up on the shuttle like in '92, I think it was. And when NASA found out, NASA was not happy and has since made it a rule: married astronauts are not allowed on the same mission. And I guess the thinking is that that produces a way for there to be complications in the mission, for there to be distractions. But when it comes to a long duration deep space mission, that changes the formula a bit. We know that the military does offer a way to station spouses with each other, if that is possible, and they see utility in that. I think that having married couples on a future deep space mission makes a lot of sense. I can see why that might not be the best, but I think that you have pros and cons on either end of things. I don't think that we'll know what's best until we start trying it.
Yeah, oh yeah, Mark Lee and Jan Davis.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So, maybe it's sending a family up like the Robinson family in Lost in Space.
See what happens.
Okay, let me get to a few other questions and then I'll get to a few other people who have raised their hands again. Just want to make sure I try to cover all of them if I could. Let's see. Okay. Well, yeah, I think you also touched on it about cosmic rays, microgravity. They're asking about would deep space psychological issues be helped by the provision of artificial gravity?
Absolutely. What myself and a lot of others say is gravity solves so many problems in space. And just happens to be that there's none of it. But if spin gravity is the way that will likely do it, and it's going to solve physiological problems with circulation and bone density and muscle mass and all that, and it's going to solve mental health problems too. There's some direct effects of lack of gravity on mental health. It seems like it has decrements in your cognitive abilities. You make mistakes more. Your memory fades a bit. We also know that it can throw off your senses, your depth perception, your sense of balance, your sense of orientation, but also just think of the psychological stress of not being able to shower, not being able to eat normally, not being able to sleep on a bed. You're gonna have to sleep in some weird sack that's like hanging on the wall. So if you could have gravity, it's gonna make a lot of your time in space a lot easier. And it doesn't even need to be an entire G. It doesn't have to be Earth gravity. Maybe just a bit of gravity is all that will take. Orbital Assembly is planning to do some research on this where they can spin their station up harder or less to see what the optimum level of gravity is. And that's going to be really fascinating research once we start learning, because maybe all that we need is 1/10 of a G. Maybe all we need is just 1% of a G. I don't know, but it's going to make it a lot easier, I think.
Very good. I've got a few people who've raised their hand. I'm going to go to the ones who haven't asked a question yet, everybody. So let me give Matt a chance. So,
Yep.
hey, Matt.
Hey, yeah. So Logan, interesting talk. Thanks for that. The question I have is I've seen sort of therapy done through a computer where they do analysis of the patient's voice and also analysis of the patient's face. So I'm wondering if that's something you're taking account of, if you know if research is being done on that.
That is an excellent question. So that was sort of what I was thinking of when I thought that this type of therapy could be improved by sort of passive sensors, passively collecting data on someone's physical health, mental health, their behaviors, facial expressions, their eye tracking. I don't know off the top of my head the research that is being done, but I'm confident that research is being done. Maybe not for an automated therapy reason, but for just every other reason you can think of. Governments are interested in this, corporations are interested in this. It's thought of as a way to sort of peel back the conscious layer and look at the unconscious, which if we could combine that with some automated therapy, I think that would be a gold mine of information.
Very good. Thanks, Matt. Let's see, we've got, well, Carl and Aiden are asking questions again, so I think we'll let them do us. And everybody, we're at about 10:20. We'll take a few more questions. And Logan's been kind enough to go
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
I was wondering, Logan, who is your inspiration and why? And also, I wanted to ask, what was your biggest challenge with regards to this project?
So thank you,
Thank
Aiden.
you.
My inspiration, I'd have to say that I know this is kind of a cheesy answer, but I'm really inspired by my mom and dad. They've taught me a lot. They've taught me how to work hard at things and to find creative ways of solving a problem. I saw them this past weekend for the first time in 18 months, and it was a great experience. It just reminded me of how much they've really shaped me. I've also been inspired by a guy I know named Steve Borneman. He was my boss at a camp that I worked at for years, and he really taught me what it means to serve others. Now, if we're talking about as far as like this field, I think Nick Canas, who is a PhD, he's a researcher at the University of California. He does a lot of research into space psychology. He's foundational in this field. And he's been really inspiring for me, very responsive to email. So him and I emailed back several times, and he's given me great ideas to look into. When it came to researching this project, the hardest thing has been just finding information. When it comes to like NASA and Roscosmos, they have their, if they don't have a lot of published data, and what they do have published is not indexed as like a normal journal article is. It's behind, it's in like a gray paper. So finding the data and getting it out of these vaults or out of these internal databases to where I can see it has been a real challenge. And I'm really hoping that as private industry does more research, they make a concerted effort to keep their findings publicly accessible so that other researchers can build off of it without having to start from scratch again and again. But thank you, Aiden.
Very good. Okay, we've got Matt and Carl, and then we'll get a few more comments in that were in the chat. So, and then we'll call it a night. So let Carl talk again.
Okay.
Okay, Carl.
Okay, I'm wondering, has there been any findings comparing the trip made by John Glenn, the second one to the first one, in terms of psychological effects that might be different because of the age difference?
That's a fascinating question. I've never even thought of, but now I'm really curious about it. I don't know, but I'm making a note now to look up that, because I think that's fascinating. I could imagine that there was a couple of differences. One, I can imagine he knew what to expect more in one sense because he's been up before. But two, I can imagine he was also a little bit nervous because he knew he wasn't quite as spry as he was the first time, and there was a lot of eyes on him. So I can imagine in some ways it was less stressful, in other ways it was more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I think that is it from the hands raised. I'm just going to go into the chat one last time. I see I do encourage everyone to take a look at the chat. There's some really good comments in there about some of the topics that have been discussed. But Marianne mentions that it is relating to prayer therapy. She participated in a prayer service with an astronaut in space who was a member of their church. So it is being done. Don't know if anyone has followed up with it, but or how much it helped them. But so just wanted to share that because the question that came up. And let me see if there are any final questions that are in there. But I do encourage everybody to take a look at the chat. That looks like about it, Logan. Fabulous.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciated the questions. If you have any other questions, I'm always happy to answer them. If you email me, my email address is logan.smith12@okstate.edu. Email me if you have any questions at all. I'm always happy to chat about all things psychology and space.
Very good. We really appreciate the talk. It was really fascinating. I think it helped open up another area again that we really don't pay much attention to. And we as, I'm an engineer, I think about the science and technology and not all the other human aspects that are involved. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. One last question to you. Where do you see yourself in the space industry?
So I would love to do research in this area. So probably one day, maybe working for a private company, helping them with this, or at a university as a professor doing research into this, and maybe one day in space. That's the ultimate goal, I think, for a lot of us.
Sounds great. We hope to see you there.
Thanks.
And maybe you'll come back and talk at another space forum after you do that.
Whenever, yeah.
So again, thank you, Logan, for joining us. I want to thank Fred Becker, as always, for his help and support on the technical aspects of the Space Forum, and my colleague, Larry Ahern, who together we work to plan and organize all these space forums and town halls. Couldn't do it without the both of you. So I'm just going to share my screen one last time, everybody, as we close out the evening. Again, I thank everybody for sticking around a little bit later. So let me just get this to advance here. So as always, thank you for attending. We know that some of you are in different time zones. So if you're having a great evening, a great day for those in tomorrow's time zone, and of course, a great weekend ahead, we encourage you to stay safe. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks for another great space forum. So everyone, wishing you well and have a good night. And thank you again for joining us. Okay.